In today's video, we're about to learn about the Emmett Till unaliving from Robin Kelley. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.
Well, if you're shooting 16, that wouldn't do the same.
Film is much more expensive.
Yeah.
So. Okay, we're rolling, right?
Speed.
Okay, Robin, talk to me about how the Emmett Till case changed a generation of people.
Mm-hmm. Well, you figure Emmett Till was killed in 1955. That was a generation of young people, people 12, 13, 14, who became the kind of vanguard of the civil rights movement. They are the ones who led the sit-in movement in Greensboro in 1960. People like Cleveland Sellers, for example, was very moved by the murder of Emmett Till because he saw himself in the coffin. He saw himself as possibly a victim of that kind of violence. And it moved him to become an active member of the civil rights movement.
Let me ask you that again, because
okay.
Without naming the name,
okay.
I think people might not know who it is,
right.
and we're not going to have time to kind of go into
right. okay.
to the name is. But it's great. It's just what we're talking about. You know, how did Emmett Till change a generation? How did this case change a generation of people?
Well, for a generation coming of age in the mid-50s, 5 years before the civil rights movement, the death of Emmett Till was a wake-up call for them. Many of those young people ended up being at the vanguard of the civil rights movement. Many of them actually went to college 5, 6 years later and became leaders in the sit-in movements.
Mm-hmm. You can be a little longer than that.
Okay.
Okay. What if I had to ask you, the legacy in the United States of the civil rights movement? The legacy of Emmett Till. What's the legacy of Emmett Till?
Yeah. Well, the first legacy, just to reiterate this last point, was that for African Americans and for whites as well, to see images of a 14-year-old boy, all over the world, plastered on the front page of newspapers, in Jet magazine, and other pictorials, it was a wake-up call for them to realize that America has to change, that the South was a very violent place, and that violence had a lot to do with black people struggling for basic citizenship rights. If it wasn't for the images of people like Emmett Till and many others who died in that period of massive violence, I think that many of the folks who volunteered to come south, to participate in voter registration, to participate in desegregation movements, to participate in other civil rights activities, that they wouldn't have been as inspired had it not been for Emmett Till. And yet, Emmett Till wasn't an activist. He didn't lead a movement. Instead, he was more of a symbol of the legacies of the past and a symbol of the possibilities of a new future if we can eliminate the kind of racial violence. Say more.
One of the things that in thinking about Emmett Till was that we talk about Rosa Parks and the Montgomery boycott and other kind of pivotal things in the civil rights movement, which were pivotal. But one thing it seems to me about Emmett Till and the Emmett Till case was that in some ways it was this emotional catalyst. That it was emotional, in a way that some of the other things that happened, immediately afterwards weren't. So you talk about the kind of emotion that this thing stirred up.
Yeah, the murder of Emmett Till had a huge emotional impact on people of all ages, but especially young people. The fact that Mamie Till Bradley chose to have an open casket so that people could see the physical scars, to see the disfigurement of this young boy whose only crime really was to be a prankster in a place where the lines of segregation are so sharp that...
Let me know in the comments, do you think if you were in the same situation that you would have had an open casket?
Just whistling or I got to think about how to say this because I don't know how you tell the story.
Okay,
but let me just back up.
Okay, let's cut for a second.
Sure.
Yeah. Started with kind of the emotional catalyst. Yeah. Let's start. Let me ask you that. Talk about the Emmett Till case as kind of this emotional catalyst of the emotional catalyst of the civil rights movement.
Right. The murder of Emmett Till had a huge emotional impact on the generation of the 1950s, precisely because of the physical disfigurement he experienced, the fact that this was a young boy, 14 years old. I think for a lot of people who might have thought of the South as a very faraway place, or even Southerners themselves who might have thought of the civil rights movement as something that they are not a part of, that this horrible murder or lynching was, a wake-up call. It convinced them that it could be themselves.
Okay, I want you to go in the comments and give me your description right now today of what the South represents to you. And also let me know, do you think we've come a long way, or do you think it's pretty much the same?
Saw themselves in his body. And I think that the tears, or maybe the lack of tears in some ways, the anger that people who mourned Emmett Till in Chicago was enough to convince people that, things have to change. I think that sometimes we don't pay as much attention to the emotional impact of this movement, precisely because we think of policy, we think of, social movements, but we don't think of what it meant to be a black boy in the age of vicious segregationist violence, what it meant to have your life cut short at such a young age for a very small infraction.
Let's cut. Okay, great. Speak. Okay, Robin, talk to me a little bit about the effect of Mamie's decision to leave the casket.
Right. Now, Mamie Till Bradley's decision to have an open casket funeral was incredibly courageous, and in fact, it was the thing that was even more than his murder, a catalyst for many people to an emotional catalyst for many people who were drawn to this incident, largely because she made a decision to allow the world to see what these white supremacists did to her son. And it became an international event, and that image of his face was marked on just about every single black person, of that generation, let alone people in Europe, in Africa, in Asia who saw the same images. And I know for me personally, when I first saw those images years later, it was shocking to me. It was one of those unforgettable images that I think that every generation, years afterwards, will never forget.
One of the things that it seems that marked this case, and then is reflected in the civil rights movement, is the idea of, I don't know, it's kind of corny, but I just, common people doing kind of uncommon things, Mamie, saying leave the casket open, Mose Wright standing up and pointing these people out in open court, Willie Reed, agreeing to testify, and, as an 18-year-old. Talk a little bit about that and that legacy.
Right. When we think of the Emmett Till case, we often think about the big name people like Charles Diggs coming from Michigan, or we think about the NAACP. But, I think the real heroes of that event were people like Mamie Till Bradley, who did make the decision to have an open casket, did make the decision to speak out to the public and to the press about what happened. Mose Wright, who, with the threat of violence, was able to stand up and testify against the white men who lynched Emmett Till. These were deep down the real heroes of the civil rights movement, and in some ways really did transform the movement from that point on.
When you say give me something else. Transform the movement from that point on. What do you mean?
Yeah. Well, before Emmett Till, much of the civil rights movement was still locked in the courts. You had grassroots organizations struggling. The Montgomery bus boycott was getting underway. But with the lynching of Emmett Till, there was a recognition that one of the most important sites of battle was the right to live. Fundamentally, the right to stop the violence directed at black people. This was violence that was escalating because of increasing voter registration drives in Mississippi. 7 or 8 people died in Mississippi that year alone. A lot of them due to the fact that they were trying to register to vote. And so once Mississippians stood up and said, we're not going to take this. We're going to stand up. We're going to defend black people. We're going to stand up, appear in the courthouse, speak to the press. I think that it gave courage to future generations to come forward and say, the violence won't stop this movement. And in fact, the violence is part of what this movement's fighting against, And in that respect, I think it really transformed the nation's civil rights movement. Yeah.
The Montgomery boycott started officially, about 100 days after the Till case. Is there do you think there's a relationship between the two?
Well, I think there's a relationship between the Montgomery bus boycott and Emmett Till in that, let me back up. I think there's a relationship between the Montgomery bus boycott, the murder of Emmett Till, and Brown versus Board of Education, that these 3 events emboldened black people to stand up in the face of segregation. Emmett Till, in some ways, let me back up. Okay. Emmett Till, in some ways, gave ordinary black people in a place like Montgomery not just courage, but I think, instilled them with a sense of anger, and that anger at white supremacy, and not just white supremacy, but the decision of the court to exonerate these men from murdering, from outright lynching this young kid. That level of anger, I think, led a lot of people to commit themselves to the movement. And in Montgomery felt the reverberations of that, just like Little Rock, Arkansas, 2 years later. And I think that anger was somehow transformed into social movement, and ironically into love. And what I mean by that is into love for the people who they're trying to defend, and love for a nation that had for so long oppressed them, but they felt was transformable. They felt that as black people involved in this movement, that Emmett Till's body was sacrificed in some ways, that George Lee's body was sacrificed, that many of the activists who were murdered were sacrificed for the sake of saving the country, redeeming this nation. And I think that's why you think of something like the nonviolent philosophy of the civil rights movement as directly related to the violence meted out on people like Emmett Till.
Okay, well, we'll get something again. I know you kind of answered this before, but I'm just going to ask you again. What was the effect of well, no, actually, let me go to another question. One of the things that was, I think, a direct effect, a real effect of the whole Emmett Till case was that after the verdict comes in, not guilty, and after after they're freed from the kidnapping charges, Mamie Till starts to go around and speak, and she's speaking in connection with the NAACP, and they're raising lots of money, and
Right.
they're getting membership.
Right,
So
right.
so talk about the effect after the trial of Mamie speaking out for the NAACP.
Right. Before I answer that question, do you talk about Scottsboro or anything in this?
No, not
Okay.
at all.
Because that's the precedent of people going around speaking.
Right,
And,
right.
but I won't mention it.
Kind of keep it in this one story.
Right. Well, after Emmett Till's murder, Mamie Till Bradley's decision to become very active with the NAACP, to speak out, really built up its membership at a crucial moment. I mean, 1955, the NAACP was at war with white supremacists, and in fact, its membership had declined drastically because it had been outlawed in many states. But that kind of national recognition, Mamie Till Bradley's willingness to put herself out there, I think played a key role in building support for the association, and for, again, instilling a sense of courage in those people who were normally just dues-paying members. They went from dues-paying members to active members, from active members to being involved in frontline organizations as a result of, I think, her stance.
One of the things that she's, I don't know if you ever have dealt with this, one of the things that Mamie says is that, the NAACP was really kind of on the rocks in some ways because they had spent so much money and so much effort in Brown versus Board of Ed. Right. And that, that her speaking out and speaking for them, they collected a lot of money. Right. Do you know anything? Is that...
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, Mamie Till Bradley is responsible for raising a lot of money, for getting the NAACP out of, I think, deep debt. They did invest huge sums of money in Brown versus Board of Education, but that's only part of it. I mean, I think the other part of the story is that they were paying bail. They were, their membership was being destroyed, through violence. People who were registered to vote were told that if you don't take your name off the rolls, well, you have to leave town, or we'll murder you, or kill your wife or children. These kinds of threats really led to the shrinking of the NAACP's base. And without that base, you lose your dues-paying membership. So it was a very difficult time for the NAACP, and that's why, ironically, the Emmett Till case was a kind of shot in the arm in a very tragic way.
Mm-hmm. Robin, let me ask you that again, because I think we kind of, if we can just get a little shorter answer of that from you. A little bit, a lot of detail. So I just to make sure we have it, because talk about the Mamie Till speaking out and for the NAACP, what that did,
right.
for the NAACP.
Yeah. Well, Mamie Till Bradley's decision to speak out for the NAACP raised a lot of money for the association at a crucial moment when they had spent a lot of money on court cases and had lost its membership base.
You can give me a little more than that.
Okay.
And that did what?
Keep it short.
Let me ask you again.
Okay, I'll do it again.
Just give me somewhere in the middle.
In the middle of that. Okay. Okay. Let's see.
Hang on 1 second.
Just have a little truck outside. But that was, your answer was great, but just kind of a little more. And I think one of the things that you can go slightly into there is, what that means for the civil rights movement coming up. Why is it important, for the world as we know it, right, for the NAACP to now have some more money and some more people?
Right.
What does that do?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ready? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Mamie Till Bradley's speaking engagements raised a lot of money for the NAACP. And that money was crucial for the continuance of its court cases. It was crucial for surviving in an age when its membership was being eroded as a result of violence. And had it not been for that kind of financial support, the NAACP might not have survived, into the early 60s, at a crucial moment when the civil rights movement was just taking off.
Great. We've got 3 answers, one long, one short, and one... It's like the 3 bears. Should we pause? Yeah, let's pause. One of the things that was always interesting to me, and we were trying to figure out from the beginning, was why Mississippi had a trial of tried these guys in the first place, And one of the things that I was reading an article back then, and one of the things that from a black newspaper, one of the things that they said that was interesting was that Mississippi wanted to prove, in the light of Brown versus Board of Ed, that they could handle their own affairs,
right.
That they wanted to show the world that, so talk a little bit about that, because it's something that you wonder about, why did Mississippi, have a trial of these guys in the first place?
Right. I hope I don't say too much, but stop me if I do, because this is
Okay.
interesting and complicated. When Emmett Till was lynched in 1955, there hadn't been a lynching in about 2 years. Mississippi and other southern states of the Deep South were trying to become legitimate, legal, presentable states.
Let me know in the comments, in your own words, be honest. Why do you think they even had a trial?
Soon after Brown versus Board of Education, you see the development of the White Citizens Councils. White Citizens Councils were supposed to be like Rotary clubs of white supremacy. They were to be legitimate. They said they don't use violence. They don't use intimidation. They use legal methods. And we know that's not true, but this was the front that white supremacists in Mississippi put up. For Mississippi to legitimize itself, it had to have a trial. It had to at least show a front of justice. Otherwise, it could be easily dismissed by the federal government. And all of its claims for the right to be autonomous, to have states' rights, to take care of its own affairs, would have been null and void. The other thing is that in the age of the Cold War, states like Mississippi and Alabama were looked upon by the world. The United States had a foreign policy of proving that democracy exists at home, proving that it doesn't have a race problem or colonial problem. And it became more and more difficult for the State Department to do its work outside of the United States when back home you have all this racism and violence. And so there was pressure on Mississippi from the State Department, pressure on Mississippi from the federal government, pressure on Mississippi congressmen, senators, and the governor to look legitimate. So they tried to strike this balance between legality and legitimacy on the one hand, and the same old white supremacy and violence on the other. And so the trial was somewhat of a show, though everyone knew what the outcome would be, and that is not guilty.
I just want to ask you again, talk a little bit about, just want to get it one more time, the legacy of Emmett Till. What was the legacy back then? I mean, if you had to say, this is the legacy of this thing, and what was the legacy?
I think there are at least two distinct legacies of Emmett Till. One, that the level of violence that was commonplace in a place like Mississippi became known to the world. And that violence generated anger and outrage and in some ways courage for those fighting in Mississippi and those willing to come south to fight that fight. I think the second legacy of Emmett Till is that Jim Crow and racism as it used to exist from the age of slavery can no longer exist. Something has to change. And black people in Mississippi itself were the ones who were going to make that change. And the great thing is that the change that they made, the extension of citizenship to all people, is a change that affected all of America, not just black people, but whites, Latinos, Asian Americans. It extended democracy to the country when democracy had never been extended to everyone before.
What was the effect of this whole case on, because we talk about black America, but what was I think there was also, a distinct effect, for black, which was also an effect for white Americans. What was the effect of this for white Americans?
Right. I think that for some white Americans who were not aware of the kind of viciousness that was part of the culture in the Deep South, seeing those images on the front page of newspapers, in Jet magazine, wherever they saw it, it was striking for them. And I think that it convinced some white Americans to actually participate in the movement. It convinced others to give money. And it still convinced others that, America is not what they thought it would be. it's not an accident that 10 years later you have this emergence of a counterculture where a lot of whites, not just young people, but whites across ages, began to be concerned about race relations in America. I think that for white Mississippians, Emmett Till did a couple things. For those who thought that that violence can continue as it always has been, realized that all eyes of the federal government, all eyes of the world were on them.
Be honest in the comments. What are your thoughts about race relations in America?
And so they had to be more careful. You begin to get pressure from some white supremacists against using violence in the late 50s and early 60s. You see this in Alabama. You see this in Georgia. An attempt to, again, become legitimate. But the impossible thing is that you cannot maintain white supremacy and Jim Crow without violence. It wasn't possible, you know. And that's why ultimately the whole system had to collapse.
Mamie Till, after the trial and after they're free of the kidnapping charges, she goes to the federal government. You know, she goes to Eisenhower and she goes to J. Edgar Hoover. Why didn't the federal government become involved in the Till case?
The federal government did not become involved in the Till case, like they didn't become involved in many, many cases of violence during the Civil Rights era. One, because the federal government really had close ties to Southern Democrats. There are political purposes, political reasons for not intervening. Two, many of them believed that the communist movement was, I spoke too soon. Let me back up. Two, many federal agents and J. Edgar Hoover and others believed that the civil rights movement was communist inspired and had been pushing that for a long time. And so for them, they treated the movement for social justice as the enemy as opposed to being a friend. And of course this had a huge impact on the movement itself because many activists believed they could not rely on the federal government for support.
We talked a little bit about the legacy of Emmett Till today. What's the legacy that we carry with Emmett?
Well, Emmett Till's image is invoked today in so many cases of police violence. You know, you think about Michael Stewart or someone like Amadou Diallo, the big cases that we're familiar with. I know activists oftentimes will speak of Emmett Till, although it wasn't a case of police violence. It was certainly a case where a murder took place and the state turned the other, sort of looked the other way, did not intervene, did not protect the rights of the individuals. And so many victims of today's police violence are young people, you know, young people like Emmett Till, young people whose crime was oftentimes being in the wrong place at the wrong time, you know. You have cases of modern-day lynchings, like Howard Beach. You know, these cases of urban violence, these contemporary violence cases, the last 20 years, all harken back to the legacy of Emmett Till. The difference is, and maybe it's not a difference, but one difference is that Emmett Till inspired generations of people to fight for social justice, to say we're going to put an end to this. This level of violence will never take place again. The question is whether or not future generations, in fighting against police violence, in fighting against racial violence, will also be inspired to put an end to it once and for all. And that's the fundamental question.
Mm-hmm. Just one more question, I think, that I've got. I just wanted to ask you again. Talk to me a little bit about the Emmett Till case as the spark for something. You know, talk about the Emmett Till case as the spark.
Okay. The Emmett Till case was a spark for a new generation to commit their lives to social change. You know, they said, we're not going to die like this. Instead, we're going to live and transform the South so people won't have to die like this. And if anything, if any event of the 1950s inspired young people to be committed to that kind of change, it was the lynching of Emmett Till.
Okay, let's cut. Okay, I'm good. Everybody a little tighter. Steve? Okay.
Right. We often think of Emmett Till as a case of a young man being murdered, but we don't always pay attention to what it meant for a young woman, a young mother, to stand up and really commit her life to activism, to social change. The courage that she exhibited, I think, was a role model for many of the women who were drawn to the civil rights movement. I mean, you know, we often talk about Fannie Lou Hamer, we talk about Ella Baker. We don't always talk about Mamie Till Bradley as one of those heroines who stood up at a time when not many women were being called forth in the struggle to that degree.
Okay, let's cut.
Okay.
Okay.
This is room tone.
Robin Kelley shared a lot of wisdom, and hopefully we've learned from it. If you caught the gemstones I left in this video, I hope they gave you something to think about. Let me know what stood out to you. To help the channel, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.